Willkommen Literatur, willkommen Worte, willkommen Gedanken, Poesie und Stille. In Berlin, in der Hauptstadt der Literatur.
Clemens Rinkowski und Ensemble, vielen herzlichen Dank.
Clemens Rivkovsky and his ensemble, thank you very much.
Herzlich willkommen zur Eröffnung des 24.
Welcome to the opening evening of
Literaturfestivals
the
Berlin.
24th International
Intendant der
Literature
Berliner
Festival in
Festspiele
Berlin. I'm the
und in den
director
nächsten
of
10
the
Tagen hier
Berliner
nichts anderes
Festspiele, this
als ein
theater.
Hauswirt.
But now I am
mich sehr,
no more
ihr
than
seid
your
die
host. I'm
Frei,
so happy to have you.
Festivaldirektorin.
Here with me is
Herzlich willkommen.
Lavinia Frey, the festival director. Welcome.
Herzlich willkommen
Welcome.
unserem Senator für Kultur
Our
und gesellschaftlichen
Senator for Culture and Social
Luciano wird gleich
Cohesion,
auch noch
Zucchialo. He
Hallo.
will speak in a minute. Hello.
Und herzlich willkommen natürlich
And a welcome
alle
to
AutorInnen
all the
dieses
authors of the
besonderen
festival,
Abends,
especially the authors of this
Beat
evening,
Umugeyi
Helon
Meret
Habili,
und Shepan
Beata
Tadoch.
Mires and
Herzlich
Stefan
willkommen.
Tradoch. Warm welcome.
Herzlich willkommen Ihnen allen, werte
Welcome to
Gäste
you, dear
und
guests
Freunde der
and
Literatur.
friends of
Es ist eine
literature.
schöne und schon lange
It is a
Tradition,
beautiful and
dass
long
das
tradition that
Internationale
the International Literature
Literaturfestival Berlin
Festival in
zentral
Berlin,
hier im Haus der
right
Berliner
here at
Festspiele
Berliner
ausgetragen
Festspiele,
wird.
is taking
Wir
place
verstehen
here
uns
as a
als ein
tradition.
Haus der Zeitgenossenschaft und der
We are a
Internationalität,
house of
ein Haus der
internationality
Interdisziplinarität, der vielen Künste, Musik,
interdisciplinarity of the
Theater,
arts,
Tanz,
music,
Performance,
arts, dance
Film.
performance, film.
Wir haben hier auch sehr viel künstlerischen und gesellschaftlichen Diskurs.
We
Und
have,
dank der Peter-Weiß-Stiftung
lots
für
of
Kunst und Kultur jedes Jahr
societal
im
and
September
artistic
sind auch ein Haus der
discourse,
Literatur.
and in September we
Wir
also
verstehen uns
become a
auch
house
als
of
ein Ort der freien
literature.
Rede und
We are also
freien
a home
Künste,
of free
ein
speech
Ort
and
der
free
Begegnung und des
arts,
offenen
a home of
Austauschs. Und in
encounters.
diesem Sinne freue ich mich
And,
zum Beispiel
that's
besonders,
why I'm very
dass
glad
am Samstag hier im
that
Rahmen
on
des
Saturday
ILB
here at the
ein
Literature
Impuls
Festival
fortgesetzt wird, den wir im
we
Juni
continue an
hier als Berliner
impulse that
Festspiele
we
unter dem
started
Titel
in June
Reflexe und Reflexionen
under the title
begonnen haben.
Reflexes and
Wir hatten hier
Reflections.
Thementage mit Meron
these were,
Mendel und Saba Nurshima
workshop days with Jeroen
zum 7.
Mendel
Oktober, dem Gaza-Krieg und der Debatte
about
in
the
Deutschland.
7th of October and the war
Da
in
waren tolle
Gaza and the
Referentinnen und
reactions from
Workshopleiterinnen hier
Germany.
im
We
Haus
had
und
workshops here in
haben,
the
glaube
house.
ich, auf eine Art
And
und
I
Weise
think
miteinander
in a way
gesprochen,
we talked to each
dass allen
other and
irgendwie
had
ein Stein vom
discussions
Herzen
that,
gefallen ist,
we
dass
felt
man
very
sprechen
relieved
kann und dass
that
man
it
so
is
sprechen
possible
muss
to speak in
miteinander,
this way.
dass wir Kontroversen und
That we
unterschiedliche
can
Meinungen
have
und Haltungen
controversies
nicht nur miteinander aushalten können, sondern auch
and-
miteinander austragen
and
können
that
und
we
wollen.
can have
Und dass
these
ihr am
discussions and
Samstag
want to have
diesen
them as
Reflexen und
well.
Reflexionen nun
And,
auch Perspektiven aus der literarischen
There will
Welt
be
mit
literary
Meron und Saba nur
perspectives
hinzufügen
on
wird. Das
Saturday
freut mich
as
ganz
well
besonders. Ich freue mich aber
to
auf
be
sehr
added to
viele
this
andere
discussion. But I'm
Veranstaltungen und
also
Programme
looking
ganz
forward to all the
genauso.
other events
In diesem
of the
Sinne
program.
übergebe ich dir
So
nun
now
das
I would
Haus
like
und das Wort dir
to
und deinem Team
hand over
und
to
freue mich
you
auf 10 Tage.
and your
Was habe
team.
ich da geschrieben?
Looking
Tolle
forward
Literatur,
to 10
spannende
days
AutorInnen
of
und heiße
great literature,
und wünsche Ihnen
interesting
einen guten
literature
Abend.
and hot authors. Have a nice evening.
Vielen Dank,
Thank you, dear
sehr
Matthias.
geehrte Damen und Herren.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a bit
Es
nervous.
ist mir eine große Ehre,
It's a great
hier
honor for me
im
to
Haus
stand
Berlin
here today at the House of Berliner
Bühne
Festspiele
vor
at the
einem
main
Publikum,
stage in front
das
of an
Literatur
audience that appreciates
die in den
literature
nächsten 14 Tagen
and is
feiern wird.
joining us in
Auch
celebration
ich
of
möchte
literature over the
gerne
course
sehr
of the next
herzlich
2
als
weeks.
Ersten unseren
But first, I would like to welcome
den
our
Senator für Kultur und
patron, the
gesellschaftlichen
Senator for
Zusammenhalt,
Culture and Social
Zucchialo.
Cohesion,
Herzlich
Zucchialo.
begrüßen, lieber Joe, es ist echt
Dear
wunderbar,
Joe,
dass du
it's
da
really
bist.
wonderful to
Meine
have you
herzlichen Grüße gehen
tonight.
auch an alle
My
anwesenden
warmest
Exzellenzen,
greetings
an die
to the
Mitarbeiter
Excellencies
des
present, to the
Hauptstadtfonds,
staff of
der
Berlin
BKM,
Capital Cultural
an all
Fund,
unsere
to the
Förderer
Commissioner for
und
Culture and
Unterstützer,
Media, to all our
die
sponsors and
heute hier
supporters
sind,
who are with us
wie
tonight,
an die vielen Kollegen
as well as to the many colleagues from the
die
cultural
Literaturbranche
and
und
literary
ich möchte sehr
sector.
herzlich die
And of
Mitglieder
course, I would like to extend a particularly warm welcome to the board and members of our supporting organization, the Peter Weiss Foundation for Arts and Politics. And now, dear audience,
Was mir wichtig ist, noch
I know you already gave a round of applause, but I would like to do it again face to face and online. Let's welcome our curator in residence, Helon Habila, and our opening speaker, Beata Umubei Mires, and all the authors of the 24th International Literature Festival, Berlin. So, another big round of applause.
Liebe Autorinnen,
Dear authors,
ihr seid das Herz
you are the heart and soul of this
dieses
festival.
Festivals. Ihr schenkt uns nicht nur eure großartigen
Not only your wonderful
sondern eure
works,
Anwesenheit,
but also your presence, your thoughts,
eure Fantasie,
your
euer
imagination,
Humor.
and your witticism as a gift to us.
Stunden, Tage,
You have
ja,
spent
Jahre damit
countless
verbracht,
hours, days, and years
Worte in Geschichten zu formen.
shaping
Und
your
nun seid ihr
words
hier in
into
Berlin
stories,
in
and
der
now you are here in Berlin,
Stadt.
in a
Euch
city
dient der
that, thanks to
basischen
you, is
Entdeckungs-
becoming a
und
place for
Denkformenwelt.
literary discovery and
Was
thought.
ist neu?
What's new?
Wir haben uns das Wort international etwas genauer angeschaut.
We have taken a closer look at the word international. Up to now, internationality was mainly based on the fact that great international contemporary literature was part of the festival in Berlin, but starting this year, we put internationality first and foremost and brought it to the place where the festival program is made, into the program, into the curating. From now on, an international selection committee will invite one meaningful literary voice to be our curator in residence for each year's festival. And our first curator in residence is
Lieber Helon,
Helon Habila.
es ist eine große Ehre,
Dear
dass wir
Helon,
fast ein
it is a
Jahr
great honor that we were able to work with you for almost an entire year. The work we shared, our intensive weekly conversations have inspired and changed us, and I'm very much looking forward to the program you have curated, and I'm especially pleased that we are opening this festival together tonight. A strong program, especially such a diverse program as ours, needs a strong curatorial team.
Dies sind Simone Schröder,
And this team
Programmleiterin für das
is made
Allgemeine
up by Simone Schröder, Program Director of the General Program, with a focus on international literature, Nora Mengel, Curator responsible for non-fiction topics, talks and discussions, and Henrike Schmidt, the Acting Director of the Young Program.
Und da möchte ich wirklich
And they all
danken,
contribute
weil
to
wir
the
ein sehr, sehr
success
kleines
of the
Team sind,
festival because
hat
we are a very
jedes
small
Team
team.
ganz,
So
ganz
every
viel
single
beigetragen.
member contributed a lot, and I thank you.
Ein weiteres Novum in diesem
Another novelty this year is our festival motto, Strange New
wird
World.
gleich noch genauer darauf
Helen will go
eingehen,
into
deswegen
more detail
hier
about
kurz.
this, just briefly.
Seltsame neue
Strange
Welt
New
spürt
World
einem Leben
traces
nach,
a life
das sich permanent
that is
verändert,
constantly changing,
in der die Zukunft bereits
in which the
gestaltet,
future is already
bevor
taking
wir uns
shape
überhaupt in der Gegenwart
before we
zurechtfinden.
have found our way in the present.
Wir haben festgestellt, dass viele der
We have noticed
Textwerke,
that many
die
of
wir
the
auf dem
texts and
Festival
works that we would like to
vorstellen
present at the
müssen, dies
festival
aufnehmen.
reflect this
Gern
thought.
möchte ich eine Beobachtung
I would like to share
mit
an
Ihnen
observation
teilen.
with you.
Weil die Welt ist, wie sie
Because the world is the way it
ist, braucht
is,
es auch den Mut
it
der
also
Lesenden.
needs the courage of the readers, the courage of the audience.
Viele der Texte muten
Many of the
uns
texts
ein,
are quite challenging to us,
teils,
partly
weil sie von Gewalterfahrung
because they bear witness to experience of violence,
Trauma in Dokumentationszentren,
trauma,
Flucht, Vertreibung, Versöhnung. Teils, weil
partly
sie uns mit ihren
because
Positionen
they irk
irritieren,
and challenge our approach with their own,
Sprache ungewohnt.
because
und
they use a
verwirrend.
language that we're not familiar with
Und so
or
geht
that
es
puzzles
aus meiner
us.
Sicht
And
ganz
so, in
besonders
my
um die
book,
Kunst.
this festival is also about the art
Das
of listening,
Zuhören als
listening
ein
as
zutiefst
the
schöpferischer
profoundly
Moment.
creative.
Das Zuhören öffnet den Blick
Listening
auf das
opens our
Gegenüber,
eyes to the other,
auf das Werk
to their work,
und den Menschen oder
to
die
the
Menschen
human,
an sich,
or to humanity.
löst Empathie, Zuwendung,
Listening fosters
Verständnis und
empathy,
Respekt und
affection,
im schöpferischen
understanding,
Zuhören
and respect.
gar eine Fülle von
Creative listening
Inspiration.
might even produce a
Und
wealth
da
of
diese
inspiration.
Inspiration ja nicht nur für uns
And
Erwachsene
this
da
inspiration
sein
shouldn't be
darf,
exclusive to
sondern
us,
insbesondere
the adults,
für die
but
Kinder und
especially
jungen
reaches
Menschen
out to
wie euch,
children and young
dass wir
people.
dieses Jahr auch so
I
ein
am
starkes
delighted that we put
Visionsprogramm
together a
und
compelling program for
Henrike
young
Schmidt mir
people
heute
this
sagte,
year.
wie gerade jegliche
And
Buchung
Henrike Schmidt just told me that all the booking numbers are record high this year, so that's great news. And
Ja. Und was mich auch besonders freut,
what
dass
I'm
wir
especially
erstmals
pleased
unser
about is
Workshop-Programm
for the
stark
first
ausbauen konnten,
year we have a lot more
den
workshops
Kindern und
this
Schulen
year,
anbieten können und die Kinder auch
and
jeweils
they are
ein
free
Buch
for all
bekommen,
children,
mit dem
and
sie
they
dann
will
arbeiten.
also receive the respective books as a gift.
Und Und das ist unser Beitrag zur Förderung der Leselust und Lesekompetenz.
And this is our part in fostering a love of reading and reading skills, and that's what we need for our future. And that's a good moment as well to say
Ich
thank
danke allen
you.
jenen, die das Festival möglich
Thank you to
machen,
all those who
und
make this
hinter der Bühne,
festival
den
possible, both
gesamten
on
Team,
stage
den
and behind,
ehrenamtlichen
the entire
Helfern,
team, the
Helferinnen. Ich
volunteers.
danke Bronwyn Wheeler. Sie hat uns,
Thank you.
finde ich, eine wunderschöne neues Aussehen gegeben. Ich danke den Übersetzerinnen,
Thank you
denen
to
ich
the
heute
translators,
ganz besonders danken möchte,
whom I would
denn
like
ihre
to thank in
Arbeit
particular
ist eine
today,
schöpferische Arbeit
because
und
their
gerade
work
bei einem
is also a
internationalen
creative work,
Literaturfestival
and
unersetzbar.
especially in the
Ich danke
context of an international
gleichermaßen
literature festival, is irreplaceable.
Ich danke gleichermaßen den Dolmetscherinnen heute
And I would
Abend
also
sind
like
dies
to
Tulsi
thank the
Camilla Bambri
interpreters
und Milena Adam,
tonight.
den
On microphone
Moderatorinnen,
tonight
die
is
so
Tulsi
viel auf den
Camilla
Abend
Bambri
mitmachen,
and Milena
auslachen
Adam,
und
the
großartige
moderators and
Schauspieler, die
wonderful
ihre Texte ganz
actors who
besonders
bring the
lebendig werden
texts
lassen.
to life in a
Ich
completely
danke dem
different
Vorstand,
way.
liebe
I would
Barbara
like to
Walster
thank
und
the
lieber Herr
board.
Kister.
Thank you, dear Barbara Walster
Ohne
and dear
ihre
Johannes
Unterstützung,
Kister.
ihre
Without your
Standhaftigkeit
support,
und ihren permanenten
steadfastness and
würden wir
constant
heute hier
encouragement,
nicht
we would
stehen.
not be standing here today.
Ich danke der Auswahlkommission.
I would like to thank the selection committee, and I look forward to learn who will be our next curator in residence. I would like to thank the Berliner Festspiele, dear Matthias and the whole team for their hospitality and cooperation, and Radio 1 and Radio 3 for the presentation. I would like to thank our strong content partners and all supporters. Every single contribution is important to us. Thank you to our sponsors from Jan Michalski Stiftung, David Leibinger Stiftung, Heinrich Böll Stiftung, and Friedrich Springer Stiftung. And I would also like to thank the Cultural Foundation of the German Federal States for the main funding of the program. The music that has already set the tone for the evening is by Clemens Rinkowski and his wonderful ensemble. And now I would like to hand over to Joe Cialo, and I would also say a huge thanks to you for all your support.
Ja, sehr geehrte, könnt ihr mich hören? Sehr gut, so halb. Ja, dann warten wir, bis das Mikrofon richtig eingestellt ist. Ich sehe da hektisches Arbeiten im Hintergrund, aber das wird dann gut, hoffe ich. Gut, könnt ihr mich jetzt hören? Gut, gut, dann passt. Ja, ich sehe einen auf jeden Fall fleißigen Ingenieur hinten. Vielleicht können wir ihn mal mit einem kräftigen Beifall jetzt aber unterstützen, weil das ist ein Moment, wo man echt reinhauen muss. Ich kenne das selber noch von meinen Bands. Vielleicht mal einen kleinen Applaus für den Kollegen da hinten, der das möglich machen will. Okay. Gut, for the time being machen wir das so. Sehr geehrte Frau Omumbwe Meres, sehr geehrter Herr Habila, sehr geehrte Frau Walster, sehr geehrter Herr Professor Kister, sehr geehrter Herr Pees, lieber Matthias, sehr geehrte Frau Frey, liebe Lawine, liebe Autorinnen und Autoren, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren. Es freut mich sehr, Sie heute Abend zur Eröffnung des Internationalen Literaturfestivals Berlin im Namen des Senats von Berlin begrüßen zu dürfen. Ganz besonders heiße ich die aus nah und fern angereisten Autorinnen und Autoren willkommen, von denen sich einige vielleicht schon heute bei dieser Veranstaltung im Publikum befinden. Während der nächsten 10 Tage werden 150 Autorinnen und Autoren aus über 50 Ländern, alle Kontinente werden vertreten sein, mit unterschiedlichen Stimmen sprechen, poetische Klänge vermitteln und damit den ebenso internationalen wie interkulturellen Dialog bereichern. Diesen brauchen wir mehr denn je, um dem dieser Tage lauten babylonischen Stimmengewirr in der Welt zu begegnen, und zwar mit kluger Differenzierung, mit ehrlicher Neugier, mit Respekt für die andere Person sowie präziser und künstlerischer Sprache. Bis vor kurzem kam es uns so vor, dass die Welt dank der modernen Technologien und Kommunikationssysteme des internationalen Verkehrs und Tourismus näher zusammenrücken würde. Es war vielleicht naiv zu glauben, dass diese Entwicklung das Verständnis füreinander und den Respekt vor den anderen Kulturen automatisch sich vertiefen würde. Mittlerweile wissen wir es besser. Oberflächliches oder klickbasiertes Kennenlernen allein genügt eben nicht, um das gesellschaftliche, kulturelle und historische Wissen einer Zeit zu erwerben oder andere Kulturen kennenzulernen, vor allen Dingen auch verstehen zu lernen.
And to begin to understand them,
wir entweder dank
to
persönlicher
delve deep
Erfahrungen
and thus
und eben in der Literatur.
To understand deeper we need
Wissen,
literature. It
emotional,
conveys
berührend
knowledge
und
that is
höchst
emotional, that
Literatur
can also
trägt
be
zur
immensely
Selbstfindung bei, indem
entertaining.
sie durch die Identifikation mit
It
Figuren oder Handlungen
contributes
ein tiefes
to
Verständnis
finding
für
ourselves
Perspektiven vermittelt.
by
Literatur weckt die Empathie der Lesenden,
awakening the
Sprache
empathy
sie
of
ermöglicht,
readers,
in die Gedanken und Gefühle
whose
fiktionaler Figuren
thoughts
einzutauchen. Und so ist das
go with the
Nachvollziehen anderer
characters in their books.
Lebensrealitäten auf einmal
we begin
nicht
to
mehr
understand the
schwer.
real lived
Auf diese
realities
Weise
of
gelingt
other
der
people.
Literatur, was
And this is how
Social Media
literature
nicht
managed to
vermag.
achieve something that social
Mythen,
media cannot
Sagen,
do.
Traditionen
Myths,
in dicht
sagas,
gelebten Geschichten
traditions
weiterzugeben und sie als
can be conveyed
kollektive
on from one
Erinnerung
generation to
zu
the
bewahren.
next as
Besser kann ich
a
nicht
part of
deutlich
collective
beschreiben, wie
memory.
es bereitet.
There's no better way
Kultur
to
erschließt jüngeren wie älteren
share
Leserinnen und
the
Lesern
joy
auf der ganzen
of
Welt
literature
und unterhalten
with
und aus dem
readers
vor allen Dingen
and
auch lernen.
publics around the world
Sie werden
who will
in
also
den
learn
Tagen
from
bei vielen
it.
Diskussionen mit den
In the next few
Autorinnen und
days, you're
Autoren
going to
hören, in
hear
welcher Weise
debates
das
with many different
ökonomische
writers
und
who
politische Umfeld
will talk
die
about how
Literatur in ihren
the
Ländern
economic
beeinflusst.
and cultural
Auch das
environment
ist
in their
Literatur.
home countries
Sie spiegelt
influences
den
their
Zustand
work.
unserer
Also, that
Gesellschaft.
is literature. It
Das
reflects
internationale
our
Literaturfestival,
societies.
unser
The
DLB,
International Literature
unterscheidet sich von
Festival
anderen auch dadurch, dass
is
es die
unique in
Lebenswirklichkeit
that
in der
it
zeitgenössischen Literatur,
presents contemporary
in der
literature
zeitgenössische Literatur entsteht,
in
neben
its
der
context, how it is
künstlerischen und
created,
ästhetischen
next
Bedeutung
to
der
the
Texte
artistic and aesthetic
maßgeblich mit in den Fokus nimmt.
aspects. It
Ich
also
bin
takes
dankbar,
into account lived
dass
realities.
hier das
I'm grateful
gesellschaftspolitische,
for the fact
auch die
that
damit verbundenen Fragen auf internationalem Niveau
the social and
tiefgreifend
political questions are tackled
genreübergreifend
on a
und
deep
mit
way in different
interaktiven
genres
Formaten
and
beleuchtet
interactive
wird. Das
formats,
Vortragen bekannter, aber auch noch unbekannter Stimmen, die
presenting
unterschiedliche
known and
Eindrücke und
unknown
Sichtweisen aus ihren
voices
Ländern vermitteln,
who share
werden die Neugier
their
der Zuhörerinnen
perspectives from
und
their
Zuhörer
countries
anregen,
will stimulate
möglicherweise auch
our
Fragen
audiences.
auslösen
They may
und
arouse
dabei
questions,
befinden wir auch
and
uns
that's
schon in
when
einem
we
Gespräch.
already
Dann
are
merken
entering
wir,
a
es
dialogue.
kommt
This
ein
is
Austausch in Gang.
where an exchange
Für
is
mich
beginning
ist in
to
diesem
happen.
Zusammenhang die
For me,
gezielte, anregende Vermittlung von Literatur gerade an junge
the-
Leserinnen und Leser
To convey literature is especially
Diese
important when it comes to
Beziehung
young
internationale
readers.
Kinder- und
The
Jugendliteratur
section
leistet hier
International
seit Jahren
Youth
mit einem
and
sehr
YA,
umfangreichen und
Children's and YA
abwechslungsreichen
literature
Jugendprogramm
has
einen wichtigen
created
Beitrag.
an
Wir
immensely
haben es
rich
eben
program
von
and
Lavinia
is
Frey
an
gehört.
important contribution, as
Dafür
Lavinia
einen
Frey
ganz
has
herzlichen
already
Dank.
mentioned. Thank you so much for that.
Genau. Meine Damen und Herren, es ist kein
Ladies and
Zufall,
gentlemen,
dass
It's
dieser
no
Dialog zur
coincidence that this
Literatur
dialogue
in unserer Stadt stattfindet.
is taking place in our
Berlin hat
city.
eine
Berlin
lange literarische Tradition,
has a
die bis ins
long
18.
literary
Jahrhundert
tradition that
zurückreicht.
reaches back into
Zur
the
Zeit
18th
der
century.
Romantik und des Vormärz
During
im
the
19.
Romantic
Jahrhundert war
movement
Berlin Heimat
and
von
March,
Heinrich Heine,
1848,
E.T.A. Hoffmann,
Heinrich,
Theodor Fontane
Heinrich
oder Kurt
Heine,
Tucholsky.
Tucholsky,
Während der
Hoffmann,
Weimarer
and
Republik
other
war
German
unsere Stadt
writers
Treffpunkt
were
von
active in
Bertolt
the Weimar
Brecht,
Republic. It was Bertolt
Arthur
Brecht,
Koestler und viel mehr.
Arthur W.
In der ersten
and
Hälfte des 20.
many
Jahrhunderts
other
wird Berlin
writers
zum Zentrum der
who
literarischen
were active here, and now
innovative
we
Formate
are
und vor allen Dingen auch
encountering
neue Ströme
innovative
entstehen dank
movements and
expressionistischer
tendencies,
Dichter und Dramatiker wie Else Lasker-Schüler und
as
Georg
did
Heim.
Else Lasker-Schüler
Die
and other
Nazis
writers
zwingen
before.
Stefan Zweig,
The Nazis forced
Anna
Stefan
Segers,
Zweig,
Leon
Anna
Feuchtwanger,
Segers,
Thomas Mann und
Leon
viele mehr ins
Feuchtwanger,
Exil.
Thomas Mann, and
Aber auch
many
die
others
demonstrative Verbrennung von Büchern durch die
out of the
Nazis
country, burning their
1933
books in
kann das literarische
1933.
Erbe dieser Stadt
The literary heritage of this city, however, was not destroyed. After the war, Berlin in ruins became another center of writing in East and West Berlin, and today Berlin, as it is reunited for the last 35 years, has evolved into one of Europe's most important cities in terms of literary events, attracting writers from international, from around the world. Our festival has an immense significance. As a regular forum, it draws the attention of international audiences onto our city and raises the profile of Berlin globally. Dear audience, I wish you, my dear writers, interpreters, translators, moderators, speakers, I hope your events attract many listeners and are well received. The people from Berlin and from across Germany and beyond who come to this city to attend this festival are audiences of real literary enthusiasts. I'm sure they'll prove it over the next 10 days. But I also hope that next to the discussions with colleagues from across the world, you will also find time to explore the city and to get to know this ever-changing Berlin. And I also would like to acknowledge the artists from other fields, for the festival always also looks beyond the box of pure literature. I'd like to thank the band, give them a big hand. This was such a marvelous opening. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank the representatives of publishing houses in the audiences, hoping that some of the works presented here will enter your catalogues of books translated into German. I thank the festival's sponsors, big and small, for the heart and brains they put into this project. I'm delighted that we're able to host the Literature Festival for the 24th time. And as Ms. Frey de la Vigne already mentioned, I would also like to thank the Capital City Cultural Fund and the Cultural Foundation of the German Federal States for the continued support. And I'd like to conclude with a few personal words. Dear Ms. Frey, this is where she sits, in case you can see it. Dear Lavinia, I, of course, thank you and your entire team, including the volunteers and the indispensable interns, for your excellent and tireless work. The fruits of your labor can be seen in a short list. The success is that we have been listed among the top 9 literature festivals in the world. Alongside our festival, there is the Sydney Writers' Festival and the Thyssen Festival of Books. And our Literature Festival in Berlin is one of the 9 top literature festivals. Lavinia, this is your success, and so this is your applause. Thank you very much.
Ich glaube, es funktioniert. Ich nehme sie ab. Danke. Ich gebe es rüber. So. Helon Habila vorzustellen. Ich glaube, es klappt. Helon Habila ist Schriftsteller. Erstmals bekannt. Es klappt schon. Ich bin ganz sicher, es klappt. Auf der internationalen Bühne wurde Helon mit der Verleihung des Caine Prize für African Writing 2000 für seine Kurzgeschichte Polen.
For his short stories and poems. His further work, especially Oil and Water and Travelers,
wurden in viele Sprachen übersetzt.
Were huge successes.
Preise, vielleicht liegt es am Standort, ich versuch's mal. Ich möchte Ihnen hier aber noch eine ganz andere Seite von Helon
now I will present you a whole different side of Helon Habila, because he was very early engaged in making African writers known to a broad audience. He curated anthologies, wrote essays, reviews in big newspapers and journals and review papers. And as a former fellow of the DRAD, he is very familiar with the city of Berlin. And since 2001, he lives in the USA and teaches creative writing at George Mason University, where he teaches the next generation of writers. And I hope that we will see them on stage here as well. Please come on stage, Helon Habila.
Thank you very much. I'm so excited to be here. We've been having meetings with the team on Zoom for 5 months. So this is the first time I'm meeting them in person. So it's exciting. Beautiful day today. So thank you, Lavinia, for that introduction. I am this year's curator in residence. This is the first time the festival is working with a curator. So you could say this is an experiment in the sense that anything done for the very first time is an experiment. Experiments are uncertain things because we are not sure if we would like the results we'll get. As curator in residence, some of my duties include suggesting ideas for panels and book talks and inviting writers for those panels. I was also expected to suggest an overall theme for the festival. Those were daunting tasks to undertake because, as you can see, the International Literature Festival Berlin is a monumental event. It was rated recently among the top 10 literature festivals in the world. Top 9, actually, I was reminded, it's not top 10, but top 9 festivals in the world. How do you organize a thing like this? Where do you start from? It is like sitting down in front of a blank page and attempting to write a novel for the first time. Luckily for me, the page before me wasn't exactly blank. I had the best team in the world to work with. They showed me that organizing a festival works pretty much.
Yes.
Works pretty much the same way as writing a book does. As you write a book word by word, sentence by sentence, and page by page, so you organize a festival, panel event by panel event. I am, of course, oversimplifying this analogy, but you get the idea. So I want to thank Lavinia and Lena and Simona and Sydney and Laura and the rest of the team in logistics and media and audiovisuals. Forgive me if I don't mention you by name, but you know yourselves and you know how you've helped me. Thanks for your brilliant suggestions. I appreciate how you somehow always manage to make me feel like those suggestions came from me. Above all, thanks for your patience when I couldn't reply your emails on time. As Lavinia, when she introduced me, mentioned, I was born in Nigeria. I now live in America. I have lived in many places in between. I have lived in England for over 5 years, in a nice, quiet town called Norwich. At least it was quiet when I used to live there 20 years ago. Among the places I have lived, I must also include Berlin. Yes, I lived in Berlin for 1 year as a guest of the DAAD. This was in 2013, 2014. And by the way, the DAAD is a great residency, and I urge writers to apply. My last novel, Travelers, is actually set in Berlin, most of it anyway. And so for me, and for others like me, the word international will always have a special resonance. When I was invited to be the curator in residence for this year's festival, I knew instantly that I had to find a way to re-examine and to express that special meaning of the word international. What does the term mean to a writer and to the readers who will be the audience at the festival? It certainly can't have the same meaning it has for politicians, some of whom are actually trying to isolate their countries from the rest of the world, or trying to annex neighboring countries, or looking for distant countries to colonize. International for them is not necessarily about cooperation or about culture. It is mostly about power and conquest and cultural hegemony. It can't have the same meaning it does for multinational corporations, whose international goals are always about exploring natural resources in other countries, even if they destroy the environment doing so. It also cannot have the same meaning it does to international tourists who travel to distant countries and live like kings for a few days and never really bother to understand or respect the cultures and the peoples of those countries. It has to be a different kind of internationalism, and one of the ways I try to capture that is through our festival theme, Strange New World. It is worth mentioning here, as an aside, that this is the first time the festival is adopting an overarching theme, another experiment. Hopefully the theme speaks for itself. It has a heavy dose of Aldous Huxley's dystopian A Brave New World, and the expansiveness, the futuristic curiosity of Star Trek's Strange New Worlds. A theme doesn't have to be original, but it must be on point. It must be relevant. Our world is growing more complex and stranger every day. We may not notice it because we are too busy, or maybe because we just don't want to believe it is changing so fast and so cataclysmically. But if you just take a minute and look out the window, you will see a collapsing ecosystem. You will see scientists hurtling towards more and more discoveries with AI, the end of which even they do not know. I call that strange. Our politics are rife with division and divisive rhetoric. The rift between the left and right keeps widening every day, opening up a chasm on the precipice of which we all stand ready to fall over. A couple of years ago, humanity faced the threat of being wiped out by COVID, whose traumatic consequences we're still dealing with. I'm not listing all this to depress us. This is a festival, after all. We're here to celebrate. I am mostly reminding us of our responsibilities as writers. The writer, Anne Lamott, underlined this writerly responsibility with these lines in her book, Bird by Bird, and I quote, "The society to which we belong seems to be dying or is already dead." I don't mean to sound dramatic, but clearly the dark side is rising. Things could not have been more odd and frightening in the Middle Ages, but the tradition of artists will continue no matter what form the society takes. And this is another reason to write. People need us to mirror for them and for each other without distortion, not to look around and say, "Look at yourselves, you idiots," but to say, "This is who we are," unquote. This is who we are. With our craft, we make the strange less strange. The writer puts the human in the center of humanity. The writer explains why the human must live in harmony with the non-human world around us, and the ultimate futility of war and violence. The writer seeks to turn our gaze inwards, to make us ask the important question, to make us understand that we must seek mastery over ourselves first if we want to master the world around us. We are the stranger we must make less strange. That is why international literature, and international festivals like this matter. This is a marketplace, not in a vulgar sense of commerce, but in the sense of exchange. We are here to exchange ideas, to listen to each other, and to learn from one another. The great German writer Goethe was one of the earliest champions of world literature. In 1827, he wrote, and I quote, "I am more and more convinced that poetry is the universal possession of mankind, revealing itself everywhere and at all times in hundreds and hundreds of men. I therefore like to look about me in foreign countries and advise everyone to do the same. National literature is now a rather unmeaning term. The epoch of world literature is at hand, and everyone must strive to hasten its approach," unquote. He went on to talk about the importance of translation as facilitator for this international exchange. This exchange, of course, is predicated on the knowledge that there is no superior or inferior, just different forms and traditions of literature. And each nation shall present its best, and each nation's best is equal to another nation's best, and we shall all learn from each other. I will leave you with this image from E.M. Forster, the late British writer, to further underline my idea of the international. In his craft book, written from a lecture on aspects of the novel, E.M. Forster envisages writers from different generations and backgrounds writing at the same time, in the same room, seated at a round table, rather like knights in King Arthur's court. He wrote, and I quote, "All novelists writing at once, they come from different ages and ranks, they have different temperaments and aims, but they all hold pens in their hands and are in the process of creation," unquote. This is a very egalitarian and democratic image, and I agree with it. There is nothing as democratic as art. It does not respect who you are or where you come from. All it cares about is what you can tell us about the human condition, and often the best observers of the human condition come not from the mainstream, but from the fringes of society and culture. In populating my panel events, I tried to work with this general spirit of egalitarianism. My only disagreement with Forster's writers' community is that most of the writers in his room are men. The only woman he mentioned is Virginia Woolf. And my second disagreement is that they are all white and European. But he was a man of his time and place, and he was working within a certain limitation imposed on his lectureship. I would expand that room a little bit. I would put more women and more people of color. I would bring in, say, Chinua Achebe and Margaret Atwood and Wole Soyinka. And I actually did invite Vivi Ganesha-Nathan and Sonia Falero and our keynote speaker, Beata Omombei-Merese, and Nnedi Okorofo, and Nu Saro-Wiwa, and Ben Okri, and a lot more, as you will see in the program, but you get the idea. By bringing in more diversity into this Forsterian room, I'm not doing it for the sake of visuals alone. I'm doing it because these writers deserve to be here, because they are as good as any other writer on this round table, and most importantly, because their presence will enrich and enlarge the quality of the conversation. In designing my panels, in inviting the writers I invited, I was guided by the simple question, what do people come to festivals for? The answer is that they come to meet their favorite writers, to hear these writers talk about their writing. They also come to discover new and exciting writers, writers from other countries, writers writing in other languages and not yet translated into the local language. I believe diversity enriches discourse, and I think we need it now more than ever before. If we don't deliberately and intentionally promote diversity, we are doomed to remain locked in our incestuous echo chambers, and will be the worse for it. It is my hope and my joy to bring reader and writer together in this place of intellectual exchange. I hope you came with an open mind. I hope you came with the understanding that your tradition is not the only tradition, and that the best from one tradition is as good as the best from another tradition. This exchange will not only make us understand each other better, but respect each other more. Thank you. And now, thank you. There will be music. They will have our keynote speaker after the music. Thank you.
Bonsoir, good evening, and thank you, Helen Habila, for your invitation. I'm so glad to be here tonight in Berlin. What can literature do? Can it help us understand our strange new world? This is a question that all generations of writers must have been asked. Some have answered with acerbic humor or by some magnificent flash of wit. I will try to answer this question myself in turn, in the light of my simple experience as a Rwandan woman, a survivor, and a storyteller. Indeed, for me, everything started with a story. 30 years ago, in 1994, I was a trembling teenager, rendered mute by liquid fear, on the point of being killed. The genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda has been going on for 2 months, in plain sight and with the full knowledge of the entire world, which had abandoned us to our terrible fate. The vast majority of my family and community had already been massacred, and my mother and I had managed miraculously to survive by hiding in the basement of an old hotel. But one day, we were discovered. Our time had come. What happened on that particular day in that tiny African country, which now allows me to be here this evening? I made up a story. A horde of militiamen invaded the hotel. They first killed 2 young Tutsi men who had been hiding in a nearby basement. Then they brought us out. Their clothes, their machetes, and the other rudimentary tools they were brandishing were still covered in blood. Within a few seconds, I invented a story on the spot. A story that was credible enough to those men who were about to hack us up. When they first saw me, they had cried out, "There's a white girl here." My skin is lighter than others because I am of mixed race. I used it like a costume to perform a role. It allowed me to pretend to be French, which I was not at the time. I invented a French father for myself, found a name and an address for him. In reality, my father was Polish, and I had never met him at the time. I pretended not to understand the Kinyarwanda the killers were speaking, although it was my mother tongue. Because my mother often listened to the radio news, I had a few notions of what was going on in the country politically. And therefore, I knew that France was an important source of support for the genocidal government. I pretended to be French and even threatened the man I had identified as the leader of the killers, the only one who spoke French, by saying that if they kill me, the French president will be angry and will withdraw his assistance. My story was believed, and the militiamen spared us. It was my little boy, to whom I told this story years later, who made me realize that it was probably on that day that I became a storyteller and that I started using the French language as a weapon. Also, that day, I almost got raped by an HIV-positive soldier. In Rwanda, during the genocide, rape was systematically committed not only to degrade women's body, but also to contaminate them with the HIV/AIDS virus. Over 250,000 Tutsi women are estimated to have been victims of gang rapes before being killed or forced into sexual slavery by their perpetrators. It was my French tale that saved me from this fate too. I have not yet told that second part of the story to my youngest son. When I became a mother, I sought and found the words that will allow me to pass on to my children the memories of how my wild adolescent imagination had saved me. It took me 20 years before I wrote my first book, then 4 other works of fiction and poetry, until this year I published a naked account of that particular day. During all those years, I constantly searched through the library and notably in the works of the survivors of other genocides to find the words that might have the exact shape of my wound. That wound inflicted by living through the dark night of genocide. There is a famous Rwandan proverb that survivors often use, which says that night can only be described by those who stay awake from dusk until dawn. Ijoro ribara warirai. And yet, for a long time, throughout the world, the history of this genocide has been heard only through the voices of others, of Westerners who arrived after the massacres were committed or who spent only a few days at our bedside, or of Rwandans who were not in the country at the time of the event. I insist on that word heard, because I would like to immediately set aside the misconception that the survivors themselves did not speak at once or that they did not write about their experiences. They did write, but how many have been read today or translated? The commonplace that a genocide is unspeakable or impossible to describe, in my experience, has more to do with it being impossible to hear. When I arrived in Europe in 1994, I had a false impression that the genocide of the Jews had always been a central element to the collective memory. In the mid-90s, indeed, the Holocaust was very present in the French public space. It was in 1995 that the President Jacques Chirac gave his famous speech about the roundup of Jews at the Veldiv and recognized for the first time the responsibility of the French state in their deportation. And it was 2 years later that the trial of the collaborator Préfet Maurice Papon took place. I followed all this with great interest. Only much later did I realize that the Holocaust survivors had endured decades of silencing after the war in France. The country needed to forge a national history that glorified the resistance fighters, a history in which the deportation of Jews, Roma people, and homosexuals will have no real place. In one of her recent books, the French historian Annette Vievorka explained that when she was searching the first testimonies of the deportation, those written immediately after their return, she has been surprised by their great number. She underlines that, I quote, "It was said, and it's still heard sometimes, that the deportees had not spoken. Their experience was, by all accounts, unspeakable, undescribable. In reality, it had been mostly inaudible." End of quote. Who remembers that the now famous book by Primo Levi, If This Is a Man, was first published in 1947 to general indifference by a small publisher because the larger ones had refused it? If I am talking about this today in order to answer the question of what the accounts of victims can do in our present-day society, this is because it seems to me that much has remained unchanged. I am, as I imagine many of you here are, confounded by the current state of our strange new world. What I mean by strange is this constant dichotomy between what we could be as human brothers and sisters and the crimes which we nevertheless continue to inflict on each other. The contrast between the mountain of information to which we have such easy access and everything we pretend to ignore. What is new is the fact that the voices of the victims have never been so free, but that is not enough for them to be audible to everyone. Indeed, what is the point of communication when those voices do not find the listening ears they expected? I would like to draw the connection that may not seem immediately obvious to you with another story. Over recent years, many people, friends or passing acquaintances, have spoken to me about the sexual violence they were subjected to in childhood. It was listening to them that made me realize how the process of silencing had been imposed on them too, by their families and by society at large. In France, it took the Me Too incest movement for the restraints of that taboo to explode. An avalanche of testimony was published online, much of it anonymously, following the publication of La Familia Grande, a book in which Camille Kouchner revealed the incest inflicted on her brother by her stepfather, a public figure in the country. In reaction to this, the French government established an independent commission of inquiry into incest and sexual violence against children. This commission gathered thousands of first-hand accounts to document those acts of violence and their consequences. Recommendations were formulated that raised hopes of prevention measures and effective justice at last. But then, the commission was stopped in its tracks, and everything points to any future developments not reaching expectations. What a liberated voice do when it falls on ears that remain deaf. The author Christine Angot, who has been writing about her personal experience of incest for years, summed it up perfectly by saying that, I quote, "People don't want to know. They find ways to put up walls, like in the zone of interest," end of quotes. She's referring to Martin Amy's book. What is this world which can no longer pretend to ignore the extent of incest? In France today, 1 child out of 10. 1 child out of 10. This world that says, we are listening to you, we believe you, but which is always so slow to provide concrete answers. What is this strange world that imposes on victims the paradox of the injunction to speak on the one hand and the incapacity to hear on the other hand? This is a question I also found in Sad Tiger, a memoir by French author Neige Sino, whom you will soon welcome to this stage. I heartily recommend that you listen to her and that you read her book, for it is an important reflection on incest, one that transforms you forever. What is the point of speaking, of writing in the face of the world's cowardice and laziness? After the genocide, I understood that many people, despite all the hospitality they were offering, expected that I should not speak about my experience. Some friends later admitted to me that they were trying to protect themselves. The accounts were intolerable to them. Others responded with evasive looks as soon as I started talking. Still others did it out of delicacy, because they thought silence would protect me, ignoring the fact that, more than anything, what I wanted was to tell my story again and again. So I kept quiet. But one day, I read Audre Lorde's poem, Litany for Survival, in which she says, "And when we speak, we are afraid our words will not be heard, nor welcomed. But when we are silent, we are still afraid. So it is better to speak, remembering we were never meant to survive." When I wrote my first book, I made the choice to begin with fiction, for I hoped to find a reassuring distance there. I was seeking a way to be heard by the people to whom testimonies were intolerable. This first collection of short stories is entitled Ejo, a word in Kinyarwanda that means both yesterday and tomorrow. Writing stories about before and after the genocide was another way of taking my readers gently by the hand without frightening them, to lead them to the edge of the abyss of our experience. Eventually, recently, I left the comfort of fiction to write my own personal story, my survival thanks to a lie, but also the story of the humanitarian convoy that allowed us to leave Rwanda. I did so out of a concern for the transmission of memory. I also wrote it in a surge of gratitude towards the Swiss humanitarian aid workers who, after evacuating more than 1,000 children during the genocide, had fallen completely into oblivion without being granted any recognition whatsoever. As I was working on that memoir, The Convoi, I kept wondering whether a personal account such as mine could ever claim to be literature. It was therefore with great gratitude and a feeling of sisterhood that I later read the words of Neige Sinault, whom I just mentioned in Sad Tiger. She wrote, "A publisher to whom I sent the manuscript rejected it on the grounds that it was not a novel. He explained that he only publishes literature. She declares, to the contrary, that a memoir might be an analytical tool, but a well-honed tool cuts to the bone. And when you reach the bone, art is never far away." When my book was published, readers and French journalists likened it to Neige Sinault's, both because of its particular form and because of the approach of de-silencing that we both adopted from our status as victims. Neige also says that literature did not save her. Maybe it doesn't save us, in fact. But for me, at least, it allowed me to feel less alone. I took James Baldwin's word to heart when he affirms, "You think that your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world. But then you read. I read the writings of other survivors, and their solitude came to warm my own. Thanks to the publication of my memoir, I was able to find many children who have been evacuated at the same time as me. Some of them were very young at the time, and their memories were fragmented. I was able to offer them the account of our rescue and also the photographs of it, which I had found at the end of a quest of more than 15 years. A book has allowed me that, to bring together the children of yesterday, to attempt to pass on something to those of today and tomorrow. To pass on not so much a duty of memory, but rather a duty of vigilance in the face of the present-day enterprises of hate. At the beginning of this summer, France, which is now my other country, almost elected a far-right government. When, on the eve of the final results, my little boy asked me with trepidation whether we will have to leave our house, leave our country, just as I had been obliged to do 30 years ago, I found myself completely at loss. What a strange world we live in. Yes, we survivors have done what we could. We have turned our experience of evil into literary texts for our contemporaries to think about it. Is that enough to undo the contradictions of our society? Certainly not. A book can break the silence, but in order to do that, what it says needs to be read and heard. Today, you have done me the kindness of listening to me. I will leave with the hope that you have heard me and that you will hear the words that the writers invited to speak at this festival has brought with them from their distant or nearby countries, from Sri Lanka and Nigeria, from Ukraine and Egypt, from the very depth of their decolonized imaginations. The voices of Uyghur, Polish, French, Yanomami, Palestinian, Eritrean, Georgian, Israeli, German authors. I will leave with the hope that, despite the disastrous state of our world, something of our experience we have offered will survive here and elsewhere to help us find our way together through the nights of tomorrow. Thank you.
Послухайте, люди добрі, що хочу казати, рожану чудівну, де чого заспівати. Як сотворив Господь світи і сонце, небо, зорі, гори, ліси, завірі, птахи та рябку море. Тоді Господь сотворитель створив ніч та дняну, а напослідку се додума сотворив людину. Зробив за ніч чоловіка, водону, духа в нього, з ним на ноги сказав живе, та пусти живо. Задумався Господь творить, та й собі міракує. Треба йому допомочі чоловіка таке, щоби було кому в смутку його розважати. Не тішиться Алиня сама й повеселіє, не дружина його мила, теплом його гріє. Задумався Господь творить сонце й неба, що з усього жінку зробив, чи трошки із себе. Як сотворив Господь світи, сонце, небо, а зорі, гори, ліси, звірі, птахи та й рабку море. Тоді Господь сотворитель створив ніч та днину, напослідку Святого мав сотворив людину. Зробив за ніч чоловіка, водонова духа в нього, з ним на ноги сказав живе, та пустив живого.
Das waren Ghana Griniva am Gesang, Ali Keita Balafon, Laura Robles, Kai John, Florian Rinkowski Bass und Clemens Rinkowski. Wie heißt dein Instrument? Theremin. Dear Beata, thank you so much.
Liebe Beata, vielen Dank für deine Eröffnungsrede. Ich möchte nur ein paar Worte über Beata sagen. Sie wurde 19...
How she came to France, she told herself us today. She had two novels published, Tous les enfants dispersés and Consolé, and now her memoir, Le Convoi, which she will present for us here on Saturday. And tomorrow she will be together with Vivi Ganeshanathan and a panel writing in a time of catastrophe. it's really hard. And please, Beata, come up, and Helon, please. And I would like to invite you all, ich möchte Sie alle sehr herzlich einladen, im Anschluss an den Applaus draußen mit uns ein Glas zu trinken und das Festival zu eröffnen. Und ich danke sehr herzlich.
Das Handmaltes oder bei uns, das kommt aus.